Welcome to Marketing Matters with Wheel Media. Today I have my good friend Ken Jorgenson, who has spent the better part of a decade navigating the complex world of commercial real estate, specifically focusing on healthcare practices. As a national director at Car Realty, he's developed a practical understanding of what medical professionals need when looking to establish or expand their practices. What sets Ken apart isn't flashy sales tactics, but a genuine approach to problem solving. Having worked with numerous healthcare practitioners, he's learned that every practice has unique needs, and finding the right space is about more than just square footage. Ken has developed a nuanced understanding of how location and space can impact a healthcare provider's success. He's the kind of professional who understands that behind every real estate transaction is a healthcare provider trying to build their practice and better serve their community. Ken, it's great to have you here. Thank you for your time.
Joseph, it's been too long in coming. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. So thanks for having
Me too. Thank you. Thank you. Every time I run into a Car Realty agent, I think to myself, where were you when I needed you 20 years ago when I was consulting with dentists who would invariably turn to me with asking for advice on their lease that they were renewing, and I hadn't a clue. And I didn't know who to refer them to because at the time there wasn't anyone specializing in realty, healthcare specific, right?
Yeah, that's true. And actually, that's exactly how our firm started. It was probably 15, 16 years ago now, where Colin Carr, our CEO, he was working for one of the big commercial real estate firms and like 98% of the commercial brokers out there was a generalist. And so he would work with a tire store one day and a restaurant the next, and maybe a dental office once every few months,
Mm.
whatever. And what he realized was every single time he would get a call from a medical client, a healthcare client, or a dentist, the landlord was changing the terms of what they were offering other tenants because healthcare providers could afford it. And so he was like, wait a second, there's an underrepresented segment of the market here. They're getting taken
Wow.
advantage of. They don't know exactly what's negotiable or how to get the right posture or what to do to set the strategy right so that they can maximize the savings and their profitability and all that. And so that's honestly where Carr got birthed about 16 years ago.
That makes sense. He saw the need and built on it from there as an opportunity to do more. And you are the national director now. Congratulations, by the way. You've been doing that 3 years now. I know it's not new, but you began as an agent, as a broker yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came on, I had a friend who knew Colin and knew that this company was getting ready to launch. Colin and a few agents and brokers in Colorado had done just deals up and down the Rocky Mountain range for, the first 4 or 5 years of Carr. And then he got to the point where so many of the national consultants and vendors and the people that were helping dentists and veterinarians and healthcare providers, they were saying, "Hey, I love that you can help us in Denver. What about my client in Tampa or Chicago or Maine or California? We have clients everywhere
Hmm.
and nobody's doing what you do. And so can you help there?" And so it was about that time when Colin was like, "I think it's time we go national." And I had a friend who knew him and a mutual contact. So that's when we got connected up. And when I came on board, I moved out to Florida, moved my family. We have 4 kids, and my wife and I were like, "Hey, if we're going to go from the Rocky Mountains, we got to go close to the beaches." And so we went out to Florida and got started there and started helping providers all throughout the state and added a bunch to the team. And fast forward over the last 10 years, I think we're around 150, 160 agents and team all across the country, coast to coast. And all we do is help dentists and healthcare providers with their real estate needs, whether it's lease or purchase or, lease renewals, like you mentioned earlier. And so we're very
Yeah.
niche and narrow in what we do. And it's been a fun ride over the last decade.
Boy, it sounds like it. And that's why it's such a perfect fit as a partner of Wheel Media, because at the end of the day, yes, we do everything under the sun when it comes to digital marketing and then some, but it's really about practice growth. That's where our heart is. And we understand the growing pains that come from anyone that wants to grow their practice. And invariably, and I've gone through this with many clients, you outgrow the space or you're looking at a lease agreement renewal that is very different than the first one you signed, and you don't know where to go and how to navigate that water. And so that's why it's such a good fit for us together with CAR. And we've really come to appreciate all that you've done for us and our clients. Let me ask you some questions then. No one's better prepared to answer these than you can. Of course, all healthcare real estate is commercial real estate, but not all commercial real estate is healthcare real estate. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of what makes healthcare real estate so unique and complex compared to just a regular, typical office lease, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, a great question to kind of set the foundation. Like healthcare real estate is extremely unique in a number of ways. If you were just out, typical commercial real estate broker was just out helping a title company or a restaurant or a number of the different retail type users that might be in a shopping center with a big grocery anchor in that center. A lot of those build outs are going to be, hey, walk in, you get what you get, put up some walls, maybe build an office or two and a bathroom and you're good to go. But as you know, healthcare, dental, medical, veterinary build outs and needs are, I mean, it's mission critical. So the need for patient engagement and the need for how those rooms and the build out requirements that are extremely specialized for like med gas lines and plumbing needs and zoning, parking needs, all the different things that go into what a provider is going to be looking for versus a typical office user or typical retail store, maybe a boutique shop. It couldn't be more night and day different. And so you've got to realize that. Let's talk about a dentist, for instance. A dentist is going to be typically one of the top most costly build outs in commercial real estate because of everything
Mm.
that goes on that the patient doesn't even see. Everything under the floor, all the trenching of the concrete and the lines that have to run from exam rooms to the compressors outside to all of the stuff you've got to build in the walls and the plumbing, the electric, all of the specialized work that goes into it. You need to make sure that as you're looking and navigating, which space am I looking at? An office space, maybe a retail space? Should I be looking at a medical office building? All of those are going to have very different variables that come into play when you're negotiating that lease. And so it's really important that you don't approach your commercial real estate like I'm buying a house, so I'm just going to go look on Zillow and put a couple filters in and I'll just choose that one. This is a business decision and it is so much more complex and there's so many additional things and that you need to think through and walk through and make sure that you process with a good team of advisors, making sure like, hey, the build out is here, the zoning is here. I got to make sure that I'm going to be able to get the permitting through because of all the parking ratios that the city is going to require. How are my patients going to look? What about my staffing needs
Oh.
and all that? And that's why healthcare leases are typically higher tenant improvement dollars, longer lease terms, more regulatory approval type scenarios, way different than you would get with just a traditional office tenant. And that's why you want to make sure you've got a good real estate attorney, a good CPA, a good team of advisors around you, a commercial real estate
Yeah.
healthcare broker and all that.
Yeah, I can speak to some of that. The last practice I worked with hands-on was a de novo, and although his space was built ground up to be healthcare, especially on the ground floor for this new wonderful complex, even after it was all said and done, he had plumbing problems up the wazoo. And invariably, you're looking back at the lease. You know, what am I responsible for? What are they responsible for? And who's going to pay for all this? Because I'm missing out on patient time and it's costing me money. And invariably, the lease comes to bear, right?
Yeah. Well, and there are even things like in traditional leases wouldn't be that big of an issue, but in healthcare, it's a massive issue. Things like when I was doing transactions in Florida, many times the biggest landlord in the state of Florida is the public shopping center. They own more real estate than anybody else, and they have more tenants than anybody else. And unfortunately, in all their leases, their boilerplate lease, they put in a relocation clause. So we want the ability, if we decide we want that space, we can push you out and relocate you to another space in the shopping center. Well, if your
Mhm.
lease has something like that in there and you just went and spent $200,000 on the build out, on the plumbing lines, electric, and setting up the
Yeah.
operatories and all that, and your lease says they can just relocate you, who's paying for that build out? And if it's not written in the lease, that legal document, and it says they can just push you out, you're either done with that lease or you're going to relocate to the space they tell you. So things like that, or even assignability. I saw a client once in Florida that where the assignability clause, they wanted to sell their practice. And they said, hey, the landlord's saying that we have to pay them 50% of what we sell the practice for, because the landlord felt like they had helped build the business because the location was so
Oh
was
my
so
gosh.
popular and traffic driving. And the problem, I was like, well, what does the lease say? Because at the end of the day, it's a legal document. And it said 50%. And I said, well, who advised you on this lease? And he said, I worked with the landlord directly. And I'm like, oh gosh, you just lost 50% of what you're going to sell the practice for.
You're already reminding me of nightmares that I never, ever wanted to recall. Thank you very much, Ken.
Sorry about that.
We're already touching on this next question, and that's how much a doctor can lose. I mean, we're talking not just a few thousand, we're talking the potentially tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're not properly represented. And I've seen that. Can you walk us through like an example, for instance, of, how this plays out in the
Yeah,
marketplace?
absolutely. So, I mean, a couple of the examples I just mentioned, those are very clear, like not understanding the lease terms and the clauses that you are signing and agreeing to. Sometimes
Hmm.
clients are so focused on, let me save a quarter or 50 cents or a dollar per square foot on that lease rate. But what they're doing is they're tripping over a dollar to save a nickel, because those clauses could have way more impact in their lease than just the lease rate and the term. That aside, a great example is one that I had in Florida, where I got a call from a dentist in Orlando at one point, and this is probably 6, 7 years ago. But this story plays out very often. And the dentist said, hey, my CPA just told me to give you a call and that you guys do free lease evaluations. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Tell me the story. And he said, well, we just signed the lease last month. And I said, okay, well, it's probably too late for us to help you do anything. I mean, once you sign the lease, it's a 5, 7, 10 year lease in most cases. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I can give you an evaluation, but we're not going to be able to change anything at this point. You've signed the lease, and at that point, you're under contract. And he said, I know, I'm kicking myself because I didn't know about you earlier, and I wish I had. The
Yep.
CPA said, you definitely need to call Carr. And so we're talking. He sends me over the lease. I'm looking at the lease, and all of a sudden, my head drops because I'm like, I know that address. I'm actually negotiating a space. It was a 3-story building. I'm negotiating a space that's on the bottom floor of that building. So I open up the lease, I'm looking at it, and what he got was a second floor space. So not as premium. The lease rate was $6 a square foot higher than what we were negotiating for a first floor space, corner space. So the doctor that I was negotiating for had window lines on both sides on a corner space, their own private entrance plus the entrance from the lobby. And then I looked at other things like tenant improvement allowance and free rent and the time to build out and maintenance cost and who's taking care of the issues, like you said, the plumbing issues and things like that. All that's extremely important in dental and medical vet type healthcare. And so at the end of the day, when I looked apples to apples, what deal we were negotiating versus the deal that he had just signed a week or two earlier with that exact same landlord, the difference was over $230,000 that he was
Whoa.
overpaying, which $230,000, you might think, okay, over the course of a 10-year lease term or whatever, I mean, is that really that big of a deal? But that's real cash. And so you have to produce what, five, six, $700,000 to cover that $230,000 loss because you just didn't have the right strategy in place to
Wow. Yeah.
negotiate. I guess at the end of the day, he didn't know what he didn't know. And so he just like
Sure.
the landlord is a nice guy. The listing agent was a nice person, and he's given me some tenant improvement allowance. But the landlord was being a nice guy, offering $15 a square foot. When in the deal we were negotiating, we were getting 65 a square foot for the tenant downstairs in a better space for a lower lease rate. And so a lot of times dentists just don't know what's on the table and what is out there. And that's why we always say you could literally lose dozens of hours and tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in your lease or purchase negotiation by just not having the right game plan employed.
Yeah, with dentists in particular, or any healthcare provider in the multiple verticals that we see, from veterinary to medicine, they don't teach leadership skills, nor do they teach marketing skills in dental school or in college. But even more so, real estate. It isn't that they don't understand real estate, which they can't because they're not real estate agents. They're not in the trenches like you are. And for someone in that area who understands what is and is not acceptable and marketable and realistic is what every client I've ever had needed that and wanted that, but had no way to really gauge what was real and what wasn't. How common is a 10-year lease? I've never heard of a 10-year lease. Is that common now?
Yeah. So in healthcare, 10-year leases are very common.
Are
And it
they?
really depends on the complexity of the space and the build out requirement. So if you think about it from the
Mm,
landlord side, if they're going to bring in a attorney or a title company or just a boutique shop and all they need to put up is a couple of, some new drywall, maybe some new paint, and they can get a tenant in for year to year or a 3 year or 5 year lease, that's not that big of a deal.
mhm,
But if
mhm,
we're coming in and asking the landlord, "Hey, we're gonna be investing $150, $200 per square foot in this space. We want you to come to the table with 25% of that, half of that, more 60% of that." If we're asking them to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into the space between free rent, build out time, and the tenant improvement allowance that we're asking, so money that the landlord's
mhm,
gonna give the dentist or the healthcare provider to build out the space,
mhm,
if we're asking for those kinds of dollars in the way of concessions, then they're going to be looking at the term that they have to amortize and to make back that money. So if it's a 5 year term, in many cases, we're asking the landlord to provide us six-figure concession packages. They're going to be underwater for the first 3 years of that lease. So they would never consider doing a 5 year lease because they're like, I'm going to be
mm,
underwater for the first 3 years. I'm not even going to make a dime of profit until year
mhm.
4 on that lease, year 3, year 4, year 5, whatever it is. And so most of the time, most of the providers we work with are signing anywhere between 5 to 7 to 10-year leases. And the most common, most medical office buildings, most retail centers, when we're converting space from retail to dental, especially, or some of the other highly
Mm,
specialized uses, the longer the term, the more concessions we can get. And the truth of the matter is, we always tell the clients as well, like, if you're not planning on being in practice here for 10 years, probably shouldn't be looking at this space because it's going to take you a few years to get your practice up and running. And then once you
mhm.
do, you're not going to want to move. You're not going to want to relocate in 3, 4, 5 years because you won't even have gotten the value out of the build out cost that you invested. So, again, if they're
Yes,
investing $200,000 into the space, they're not gonna wanna be looking for another location in 3 or 4 years, you know?
that makes
Yeah.
sense. If a contract is negotiated correctly, a 10-year lease, the longer the term of the lease, could actually be in favor of the healthcare provider.
In most cases, it is. And if it doesn't look that way, then our agents are saying, okay, if you're not providing concessions that are consistent with longer term leases, then let's look at a 5 year
Mhm,
lease. Send me over, landlord, send
mm,
me over a proposal for a 5 year and a 10 year, and let us look at the differences. And we actually have comparisons and evaluations that we're able to help our clients see. Like sometimes the clients say, I may want to own in 5, 10, 15 years. I don't want to sign a 10-year lease. And again, if that makes sense for them, then we'll take a look at side by side and say, hey, 5 year lease may make sense. For instance, if we're working with like a chiropractor, they're great
mhm.
clients, great tenants, but their build out needs are not anywhere near as involved as a dental client or maybe a
Right.
plastic surgeon, dermatologist, some of these other veterinarian
Yes.
office that has
Mhm,
a lot of gas lines and plumbing lines and very
mhm.
structured build outs. If we're working with a physical therapist, again, a lot of times their build out is just big, wide open rooms. They want
Right.
space for the gym space and the equipment and the treadmills and the walk this
Mhm,
and all that. And so if that's the case, then the longer term, may not be necessary if the landlord's not providing a ton of concessions. So it really depends on the space and the practice and the vision that the provider has and how long, it
mhm.
makes sense. But again, those concessions, most times, the longer the term, the more the landlord's willing to give.
So let's say that I don't really have any plans, even though I'm growing at a pretty decent click. I can't see myself buying another practice or outgrowing the space that I have. I've got enough. But the one common denominator with every healthcare provider is that lease renewal, and I may be 2, 3 years away from that, and maybe I've thought in the back of my mind, maybe I've thought, should I renew or should I move? What's the best option? So instead of waiting right up to the point that I'm going to be, renegotiating or signing a new lease to call you, how much runway should I really have? When should I really start thinking about this so that all of my options are on the table?
That's a great question. I mean, you just gave it away. Options is, I mean, that is the foundation of every
Mm,
negotiation we have: purchase, lease, startup, relocation, acquisition, lease renewal. I'll tell you, the most common real estate transaction in any market across the country is not startups, it's not relocations, it's not expansions, additional offices, it's not purchases. It's the simple lease renewal. There are more lease
mm,
renewals happening this month. And here just outside of Nashville, more lease renewals being signed this month in Nashville than any other type of transaction. And that's consistent across the country because a lot of times providers are like, oh man, it's easier, it's safer, I don't have to relocate. I don't know if I'm getting a fair deal, but I remember moving in here and that was a hassle and I don't want to move. So I'm just going to sign a
mhm.
lease renewal. But to your point, most of the time, landlords, they're in the business of commercial real estate. They feed their families based on profits that they make from commercial real estate negotiations. So we always say you can't blame a landlord for being a landlord. It's how they feed their family. And this is their business and they do really good at it. And so everything is calculated from the very first conversation you have on the phone call. If you're calling a name on the side of a commercial real estate building, everything you say in that conversation can and will be used against you during that negotiation. So you have to be careful not giving away posture because what you said about options is so true. Whoever has the most options in the negotiation is going to win that negotiation. So there's two sides of the table, the landlord and then the tenant. And if the landlord has more options, they win. If the tenant has more options, she wins. And so what we would do is we'd take the doctor to the market. To your question, we would say somewhere between 12 to 24 months out from your lease expiration, you want to be having a conversation with your team. And you want to be talking about, is it better to stay, expand, relocate? Should I just look at a lease renewal? Am I at a
Mm,
place in my personal life, professional life, the growth of my practice? Should I be looking at more space, less space? Should I just stay put because I've got so many other things going on in my life right now that I don't want to think about relocating? But about a year out, somewhere between 12 to 24 months out, we're able to take you to the market. And so we would show you, here's your current lease. Here's what your landlord is offering you for the lease renewal. Here are the terms.
mhm,
And then here's what four other landlords in the market are offering you. And not only that, here's a purchase option if you wanted to own a building. Maybe that is a part of your desire, maybe it's not. But we would like to make sure that you're looking at everything apples to apples. Here's your current space, here are other spaces. And even if you came to us, and I had many clients when I was transacting deals in Florida, I had many clients that said, "Ken, I don't want to relocate. I want to stay. I'm having another baby in the next, yeah, I'm pregnant and I've got so much stuff going on in my life and my practice is doing great and I'm on autopilot there and I don't want to relocate." I'm like, "Great. I need you to at least tell me that you want to look at the market. Ken, I just want to stay put." And I'm like, "I hear you, but I need to hear you say, I want to look at the market so that I can go to your landlord and say, my client has hired me to evaluate other options in the market. One of those is staying put, but she's asked me to look at a few other options because you and I, landlord, are in the real estate business. She's not. And so she's not sure if she's getting a fair deal. And so that's why she hired us. So we go and negotiate a couple spaces so that we can put a side by side comparison for her to see, here's the rent rate, here's what the concessions would be that the landlords are offering you. And then we take that back to your current landlord and say, hey, you're going to have to sharpen your pencil. I know that our client has a renewal option in their lease, but you and I both
mm,
know after 10 years of annual escalations, they're here and the market's here. And so you're being a nice landlord by saying, I'm just going to keep you at that lease rate. But you and I both know it should be about $3 or $4 less per square foot, which is $600 a month or whatever the number is. Right. And so
mm.
we go to the landlord and say, you have a shot for this renewal, but you need to look at her as a brand new tenant, as somebody that
Wow.
you are having to fight to keep their business. Because at the end of the day, if you lose this tenant, you're going to be losing out on a lot more than just the rent payment. You're going to have to release it. You're going to have to get new tenant improvement allowance. You're going to have to pay a couple of brokers. You're going to have to get an attorney involved. You're going to have to market the space. And there's going to be a lot more cost involved. So it's easier for you just to discount that down to what
Mhm,
the actual market rate is and give my client a
mhm.
fair deal. And then you'll retain the tenant. You'll keep another 5 or 7 or 10 year client happy, have a tenant in the building. And then our dental client or whoever our client is, they're able to go to sleep at night knowing that they got the most fair, profitable deal possible in the market because they evaluated everything and they had the option.
That is wisdom that comes only through experience, to treat it as a truly a new lease. Because that landlord, they don't know how long it's going to take them to release that or convert that to a new lease. And that's a lot of loss for them, depending on the area.
It is in the landlord's best interest to not bring up
Hmm.
your lease expiration until 30 days before your lease expires. So they
Yes.
do that intentionally so that they know you can't move a dental practice in 30 days. So when we
Right.
come to the landlord and we say, "Hey, we've been hired by this doctor," and then the landlord says, "Their lease isn't up for 12 to 18 months." And we say, "Exactly." They are considering buying land and building a building. They're considering purchasing. They're considering whether they relocate or if it makes most sense to stay put here. And so we have the time to be able to fully evaluate that and make sure that they're making the most informed decision possible. So when we are leveling that playing field and when we start that negotiation, then the client is in the right posture, the right seat, and the power position of that negotiation to be able to really dictate the terms and level that playing field to get the best possible deal because we have the time.
Ken, in my experience, it was far more common for that very scenario where the doctor was like, "Oh, I forgot I need to renew my lease." And I'm like 30 days away. And he wants advice 30 days away. There's nothing you can really do. You are backed up against a wall unless you're planning to move and you know where to go. And so, doctors, tip number one, if you don't know the date of your lease renewal, you should. And then you need to be looking at 12 to 24 months prior to engage with an expert so that you're really looking at the practice from a long-term perspective. You may have thought about, should I be here? Should I be moving? Because the markets change. I remember in Phoenix, we just kept moving further and further north, every practice that I had. And when I go back to see where the first practices originated, it's not a favorable neighborhood. I wouldn't want to live there, let alone practice dentistry there. Unfortunately, for some cities, that's the way it is. Demographics change. And as such, doctors have to be prepared for making those adjustments as well.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. If you don't have the right timing and posture in that, you literally have the ability, the chance to lose tens to hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of dollars because you just don't have options.
And unfortunately, time can be on your side or it can be your nightmare. Because if there is no time, the landlord will take advantage of that. It's just a simple fact. With practice growth and expansion and all that we've been talking about, a real specialty of anyone in real estate, obviously, and the DSO movement, if you will, becoming more popular, whether it be DPO, DSO, what have you, that must represent some interesting challenges for CAR. How has it changed your landscape with DSOs and group practices?
So obviously, and it's not even just in dental, it's in a number of healthcare industries where
Yeah.
consolidation and group practices, franchise models, DSOs, MSOs, they are definitely more and more of an impact and influence in the industry. And we help, I mean, we have a national accounts team that works with a lot of those group practices that are looking to scale. And we've helped many clients that started out with one
Mm.
office and then two, and then wanted to go to 5 or 10 or 20 plus. And so their real estate game plan and strategy is very different than a provider who's looking for, I want one office. I want to be a dad at home with the kids and I want to work X amount of hours and I want a certain work life balance. And I'm not looking to build a small empire. I'm just looking for my one practice. So they're very different strategies and models. What we found is just as many people that are consolidating and going into that space. We have providers coming out of the hospital network or providers coming out of the DSO saying, "Hey, I didn't go to school for 8 years and get into hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt to be an employee for somebody else. I did that for a couple of years and I really want to own my own practice. I really want to be running my own world, my own space. I have a vision that is not aligning
Hmm.
the provider that I'm working with or the corporate office I'm working with." And so it's interesting because while we have seen consolidation happen, we've also seen the opposite effect where startups, providers are saying, hey, I want my own thing as well. And so we
Hmm.
really haven't seen huge fluctuations in our startup business, the startup side of our business over the years. It's remained pretty consistent across all the verticals, but they're very different real estate strategies.
Interesting. Your website mentions that your impact extends well beyond the providers and into their families, employees, and patients for generations to come. Can you help our listeners understand just how a real estate decision would affect and ripple through that many layers of relationship?
Absolutely. So I think of a dentist that I helped, and she was a client for my last year or so when I was in Tampa. She was looking at opening up a pediatric dental office, and she had been looking for years on her own, years,
Hmm,
trying to figure
hmm.
out where to open, how to open. And when she came over to us, she said, Ken, I've lost out on numerous things. I found the perfect spot. This is exactly where I wanted to practice. I love
Yeah,
the landlord. I love the space. I can see the river right outside the window. I can vision
yeah,
my opportunities. And then the landlord chose a different tenant, or the landlord chose a different dentist, or
yeah.
somebody else came in and swooped in and got the deal. And we came in, we stepped in, we put her through the typical transaction we do. We helped her get the space she wanted, and she's doing just fine now. But I look at the years of lost time and
Oh,
energy and effort that she invested with all the emotional ups and downs. And at the end of the day, you don't go through the effort to get your degree, whether it's in dentistry, in medicine, in veterinary health, whatever it is, to spend dozens of hours as a general contractor, as a site selection specialist. Most of the time, like you said, they don't get really any training in dental school on how to search for lease spaces or what to look at. And residential is not at all like commercial. It's not like Zillow, again, where you go on and just search for 100 homes. When my wife and I bought a home, that's what we did. And we actually sent the home we want to our real estate agent. It's not like that. Commercial is very different, and it's very nuanced. It's very specific in terms of the spaces you would be looking at and the terms and the landlords you want to be working with. And so we are able to take that piece of work off of the dentist's plate. So we save them dozens of hours. But I think the bigger piece, I think through one of my friends here at CAR, he's a regional director in the Rocky Mountain and the West Coast region. His name is Kent Hildebrand. And
mhm.
Kent tells this story of a dentist that came up to him at one of the county dental shows. And he said, because of, and he was telling some colleagues about Kent. And he said, because of Kent, I'm able to retire 4 years earlier because of what he was
Mm.
able to save me on my lease, because he got the landlord to pay for 50% of my construction costs, and I was able to bring my lease rate down. Then I get him connected up with my financial advisor, and I'm able to see, okay, based on that and my production, you're able to actually sell your practice earlier, maybe retain the actual building, and then become a landlord in retirement, make that a part of your exit strategy, your retirement portfolio, or whatever the case may be. But I see how that impacts people's livelihood, their families, their retirements, the kind of staff they can hire. I mean, if we save somebody $100,000, they're able to hire better. They're able to get better technology. They're able to make better decisions based on the equipment they purchase, or the ability to market
Yep,
their space differently, the investment that they can have, because they're not going to be house poor with making mistakes on their real estate. They now
exactly.
have margin that they can spend to be able to make sure that they
Hmm.
get their practice started and profitable as quick as possible. So that's really what we're talking about, being able to impact not only a dentist, but all the people, the families, the vendors, and everybody else attached to that dentist in a really powerful, impactful way.
That's a great example of the impact that the right decision and the right opportunities can represent to a healthcare provider. The last conversation I had, probably about a year ago, with a local car rep here in my area, I remember him mentioning that what doctors don't understand is that when they decide to start looking for a property, or they look at a lease renewal that may include making a major change, they don't know what properties are almost on the market, but they're not available yet. Even if they were looking on their own, they're not going to find them, because it's that real estate agent focused on all the healthcare places that are suited for dentistry or whatever vertical, he or she's actually aware of how that market is changing. And he knows that 6 months from now, that property could be available. You wouldn't even see it on the market. You wouldn't even know of it because the connections are really that deep.
The other thing, just to your point, the construction process, I mean, in many municipalities, permitting can take anywhere from 2 months to 4 or 5 months. So somebody could sign a lease, a dentist could sign a lease at 101 Main Street, and they're not swinging hammers. They're not putting any signs in the ground or doing any construction or anything that's visible to anybody on the outside for 5, 6, 7 months. And so if you're out there working on your own, driving around, just trying to call numbers on signs and, oh, this space looks good. The problem is you sign a lease at 102 Elm Street because you're like, this looks great, with zero
Mhm.
knowledge of the fact that you're going to have a main competitor opening up right next door to you. And so having a team
Mm.
of advisors, not going it alone. I don't know about you. I have a wife who reminds me very often that every time I try to DIY a big project in my house, it ends up taking longer and costing us more than if we would have just hired somebody who actually does this every day for a living. And the same
Yeah.
could not be more true in commercial real estate. This is not a DIY industry. You should not be out
No.
there trying to go it alone. And I'm not just saying use car, I'm saying use a healthcare tenant rep brokerage firm. Make sure you have a good CPA, make sure you've got a good marketing team, right? Make sure that you've got people that are going to be there to help you figure out the strategy for opening or relocating. Make sure you've got a good CPA and financial advisor. Like, you need a team of advisors around you to help you make the most
Absolutely.
informed decision for your practice, because it can be the difference between disaster and wild success and profitability.
Great example. Have you seen major or significant changes in the last 5 years in this industry? And based on what you're seeing, do you have any predictions for what the future holds and challenges that we may be facing?
If I had the answer to that, we would definitely all be millionaires.
Isn't that true?
There are some trends
Yeah.
we are seeing for sure. Obviously, since COVID, the work from home thing has really shifted the office space
Hmm.
landscape. And so while a lot of companies are forcing their people to return to work and actually take up commercial real estate space and office space, for the last few years, we've seen a decent amount of vacancies in the office space sector in most markets.
Mm.
Now, our typical client, a dental client, is not usually going to go into the 45th floor of a downtown office space with 1 million square feet. But
Right.
vacancy in a market does impact and shift things like rent rates and the aggressiveness of landlords in negotiations and things like that. I will say another thing we've seen that's kind of interesting over the last few years is, so you typically had medical commercial space, you had office space, and then you had retail space. Those were, and then like industrial or flex space. So those were the 3 or 4 main types of commercial real estate. In the last few years, we've really seen kind of a move to what is being called medtail. So medical retail kind of converging. And you see that like with med spas and urgent cares and dental offices. We have a lot more dentists now looking at retail type centers. They want to be in centers with a lot of traffic and eyeballs and visibility and things like that. And I think that, to
Hmm.
your earlier question about DSOs and MSOs, I think a lot of their real estate strategy is focused on traffic and visibility. And so I think as an industry, it's kind of pushed more and more offices to look in that direction. But that's why we like looking at both. We like, hey, doc, if an office space makes more sense on the economics and the concessions, maybe that allows you to free up more money to market your space in a very strategic manner that drives people to you. And then you're able to turn a space that may not be on First and Main into a very profitable location. But I will say, as a whole in the industry, we've seen more and more move to retail type centers, high visibility, big signage, lots of parking, and then also non-traditional neighboring tenants, so might be next to a Pilates studio, a restaurant, other boutiques and retail type users. I would say the last one, even during COVID and then shortly after, we've seen really a spike with construction costs that has not come down all that much. I mean, it's leveled out a little bit since 2001 and 2 because of the supply chain issues, but
Yeah.
Still, when I was transacting probably 5 years ago, I would say the average dental office in my area, which was the west coast of Florida, was probably $100 to $125 a square foot, 150 maybe a square foot, depending on finishes and things like that. I would say that exact same
Hmm.
build out right now is somewhere between 200 to 230, 240 a square foot. And so we have seen construction costs, obviously, interest rates and financing costs have increased. And so negotiation is extremely important because every dollar we can save on the lease or the purchase is real savings to the bottom line of where you may not be able to control these other variables. You can control the real estate costs.
This has been a wealth of information, Ken. I can't imagine any healthcare provider not finding this to be extremely worthwhile throughout their career. They have to let specialists do what they do, just like they do. We know we have to refer out when it's beyond our skill set, and outsourcing real estate decisions, even as simple as the not so simple lease agreement renewal, really does require some skill and some representation. And you've really helped us understand the value of that. If a doctor wants to find out who their agent is for their area, I assume they would go to your website. Can you help them with that?
Absolutely. You can jump right onto car.us. It's CARR.us. Right there, we have a find an agent button. You can look in your market. We're licensed in all 50 states. And so you'll see who your agent is in that market or that area. In many markets, we have 3 or 4 or 5 agents in a market. And so you're always feel free. My information's on the website as well. Feel free to reach out to me and just say, hey, I'm here, but I'm actually looking there. Or I would like the most tenured agent in a market or the one who does the most veterinary deals or dental deals or whatever type of transactions. You're always able to reach out to myself and I can get you in touch with the right agent as well. But we have all that information online as well as a ton. We have a full glossary and a number of blog and article posts. I would say we have 50 or 60 different articles about lease terminology or should I lease or own my real estate or what are the 21 most negotiable items in a lease or all the different things, medical space versus office space. What should I be thinking about or looking at? So we've got videos and articles and blogs and all kinds of resources on our website that help providers if you're looking for more content on these topics.
Wonderful. That sounds like a great resource. Thank you, Ken.